Hello, Mr. and Mrs. American Citizen. Are you wondering whom to support in 2020? Want to know who the master debater is from the Democratic debates? Find out now on this installment of How to Win Debates and Influence People.
Hey everybody, today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to look at both Democratic debates and see if we can't glean some lessons from everything that was said. Let me begin by saying that while I claim no expertise in this field, I was a debater, both in high school and college, and I did win a trophy or three. None of the observations that I'm going to make are in the least controversial. These are mostly lessons which are taught to novices, and I'm frankly shocked by the malpractice conducted over the course of these 4 nights. That isn't to say that there weren't some good performances, they were just few and far between. I will also tell you from the outset that I am a Bernie supporter, but I didn't let that affect my critique, except maybe to make me harder on Bernie. I will also tell you that I'm not going to pick winners or losers per se. I'm not going to pretend that all 21 debaters will move on, and I will let you know from jump that if I don't mention your favorite, it's because I don't think they have a chance. Some of the ones I mentioned are in the same boat, and if I do so, I will let you know. There are a number of differences between what I did as an academic debater and what candidates for the President of the United States have to do. In this case, every candidate has faced 9 separate opponents at once. I was never faced with anything other than one other team or person. I started out with a declared topic. The candidates never know when they'll be asked to defend any of a myriad of positions, past or present. I had a predetermined amount of time to speak at every phase. The candidates never know when they'll be called on, nor for how long they'll be able to engage. There are some things, though, which are the same no matter at what level you find yourself being engaged rhetorically. So, what I'm going to do is talk about 3 separate areas, where even those who perform well could stand improvement. I will be looking at the good, the bad, and the ugly of each. This is not an exhaustive list, but I think that these 3 will be useful to the majority of my audience, whether you're talking to a young earth creationist or an alt-right stooge. The reason for doing all of this is to improve your own argumentative ability, and mine as well. So let's get right into it. The first area is define your terms, or framing the debate. This is perhaps the most important lesson that we can take away from these debates. The way that we talk about certain issues, especially ones like immigration, family separation, healthcare, etc. Certain candidates recognize that the words that we use and the ways that we use them have a direct effect on different parts of our brain. In debate, this comes out in arguments about our understanding of individual words, sometimes even so far as to debate the word is. In political debates, this usually comes about as disagreements about which phrases to use. For example, the difference between the phrase illegal immigrants and undocumented immigrants. They are both used to talk about the same group of people, but one implies that by the very nature of being an immigrant, that makes you illegal. When Delaney, during the CNN debate, was called out for continuing to bring up right-wing talking points, that is, because he, whether consciously or not, was doing just that. For instance, during the healthcare debate, he argued that a majority of rural hospitals would close their doors if they had been paid at the Medicare rate last year. Besides the fact that this is anecdotal, based on one conversation he had with a rural hospital manager, it is also just wrong, failing to take into account all the other ways a Medicare for All system would change the healthcare industry. But I'm going to focus on the first debate because NBC was much more subtle. Their immigration debate was flagrantly horrible in that regard, but there were other parts of the debate which showcased this as well. First, we're going to look at the good. Now, there were a couple of other exceptional clips. Julian Castro in the NBC debate at 37.5. Tulsi Gabbard at about 51 minutes was really good. But in this case particular, I'm going to talk about Elizabeth Warren at the 56-36 mark.
Senator Warren, we're going to get to the gun question here. Parkland, Florida, it's just north of here in Broward County. As you know, it has created a lot of teenage activism on the gun issue. It has inspired a lot of you to come out with more robust plans to deal with guns, including assault weapons ban. But even if you're able to implement that, What do you do about the hundreds of millions of guns already out there? And does the federal government have to play a role in dealing with it?
So, in this period of time that I've been running for president, I've had more than 100 town halls. I've taken more than 2,000 unfiltered questions. And the single hardest question I've gotten, I got one from a little boy and I got one from a little girl. And that is to say, when you're president, how are you going to keep us safe? That's our responsibility as adults. 7 children will die today from gun violence, children and teenagers. And they won't just die in mass shootings. They'll die on sidewalks, they'll die in playgrounds, they'll die in people's backyards. Gun violence is a national health emergency in this country, and we need to treat it like that. So what can we do? We can do the things that are sensible. We can do the universal background checks. We can ban the weapons of war. But we can also double down on the research and find out what really works, where it is that we can make the differences at the margins that will keep our children safe. We need to treat this like the virus that's killing our children.
You didn't address, do you think the federal government needs to go and figure out a way to get the guns that are already out there?
What I think we need to do is we need to treat it like a serious research problem, which we have not done. You know, guns in the hands of a collector who's had them for decades, who's never fired them, who takes safety seriously, that's very different from guns that are sold and turned over quickly. We can't treat this as an across-the-board problem. We have to treat it like a public health emergency. That means bring data to bear, and it means make real change in this country, whether it's politically popular or not.
Senator Booker, you have a program.
We need to fight for our children.
Senator Booker, you have a federal government.
Elizabeth starts out talking about guns the way they wanted to, but about halfway through, she started talking about guns as a national health emergency because she sees that as the actual case. Now, whether you agree with her or not, this was a very masterful way that she had of both accepting the framing of the interlocutors, but then changing the focus to suit what she wanted to talk about. And I really can't say much more than that. Now for the bad. There was Booker at 27 minutes in the first debate. Sanders at 4 minutes in the first debate, but I'm going to talk about him and that performance in my second area of critique because it was just bad. But right now I'm going to talk about Andrew Yang at 7 minutes 56 seconds in the CNN debate part 2. Let's just get right into it.
Andrew Yang.
If you've heard anything about me and my campaign, you've heard that someone is running for president who wants to give every American $1,000 a month. I know this may sound like a gimmick, but this is a deeply American idea, from Thomas Paine to Martin Luther King to today. Let me tell you why we need to do it and how we pay for it. Why do we need to do it? We already automated away millions of manufacturing jobs, and chances are your job could be next. If you don't believe me, just ask an auto worker here in Detroit. How do we pay for it? Raise your hand in the crowd if you've seen stores closing where you live. It is not just you. Amazon is closing 30% of America's stores and malls and paying zero in taxes while doing it. We need to do the opposite of much of what we're doing right now, and the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes math. So let me share the math. $1,000 a month for every adult would be $461 million every month right here in Detroit alone. The automation of our jobs is the central challenge facing us today. It is why Donald Trump is our president, and any politician not addressing it is failing the American people.
Yang started talking about his freedom dividend, or what we technically call universal basic income. And that would have been an interesting way to start the debate, completely changing the framing of the debate. Instead, however, he decided to go back to an old way of looking at things and claim that because he was Asian and liked math, that was enough to make him different from Donald Trump. I don't know how to say this, but everybody is different from Donald Trump. Anyway, Yang missed his opportunity to fundamentally change the nature of the debate. Rather, he played into the nature of the debate as it was happening, and therefore let himself get sucked back in to that debate in that context. And now we get to the ugly. I would do Delaney, but that would just be too easy because he did that during the whole of both debates. I did not find a single answer of his either persuasive or in any way effectively changing the way the debate was framed. And so I'm not going to pick on him because it would be far too easy. Klobuchar during the first debate had a couple of points where she tried to change the framing but did a horrible job. But Governor Hickenlooper made an especial ass of himself. So let's look at his performance during the NBC debates, specifically at 7 minutes and 45 seconds.
Let me get you in on this. You've warned that Democrats will lose in 2020 if they embrace socialism, as you put it. You were booed at the California Democratic Convention when you said that. Only one candidate on this stage, Senator Sanders, identifies himself as a democratic socialist. What are the policies or positions of your opponents that you think are veering towards socialism?
Well, I think that the bottom line is if we don't clearly define that we are not socialists, the Republicans are going to come at us every way they can and call us socialists. And if you look at the Green New Deal, which I admire the sense of urgency and how important it is to do climate change, I'm a scientist, but we can't promise every American a government job. If you want to get universal health care coverage, I believe that health care is a right and not a privilege, but you can't expect to eliminate private insurance for 180 million people, many of whom don't want to give it up. In Colorado, we brought businesses and nonprofits together. We got to near universal health care coverage. We were the first state in America to bring the environmental community and the oil and gas industry to aggressively address methane emissions. And we were also the first place to expand reproductive rights on a scale basis, and we reduced teen pregnancy by 54%. We've done the big progressive things that people said couldn't be done. I've done what pretty much everyone else up here is still talking about doing.
Governor, thank you. Senator Sanders, I'll give you a chance.
He was asked specifically what policies he thought would cost us the election. And all that he mentioned were his policies. See, that's the whole point of reframing the debate. You answer the question in such a way that you can reframe the debate. When you start out with the assumption that they already know that your answer to the question or what your answer to the question is and that you're just going to start with the reframing of the debate is absolutely ridiculous. So during that answer, he never specifically addressed Bernie Sanders or his democratic socialism, both of which were implied in the question. If he is going to make himself out to be someone different than a socialist, he needs to make an argument that a capitalist would make. And Hickenlooper had an interesting way of backing his way into supporting every single one of Bernie's ideas just a little bit later and a little bit softer. It was almost as if he just didn't want to appear socialist. But no matter what you do, if you're going against Trump, he will call you a socialist. There's nothing you can do about that. So let's go straight to area number 2. Answer the question, even if your answer is, I don't know. Tulsi. This is seemingly the most difficult skill for politicians to learn, whether it is with reporters or in a debate format. But in the case of these presidential primary debates, it is especially important because of the inclusion of people who do answer the question, thereby making you look weak in comparison. So if a candidate is asked a yes or no question, you know by the way they start the answer whether or not they are going to actually answer. That doesn't mean the answer has to start with a yes or no, because often the answer is not an easy answer. But if the answer is more nuanced than that, start out by saying so. If the question is instead one asking about the debater's position vis-a-vis a particular policy, they should be able to answer that question before expounding. Even if it's to admit that you hadn't considered that aspect of things, or however you've decided to answer, I don't know. Which, by the way, is a much better answer than one which seems to answer it, but which later you have to disavow. So, for the good in this regard, we could talk about Warren at about 21:20 during the first debate, Tulsi and around minute 50 during the second debate, but we're going to look at Mayor Pete Buttigieg at around the 84th minute in the second debate.
You have been criticized for your handling of racial issues in your home city of South Bend, from diversity in the police force to housing policy. Given your record, how can you convince African Americans that you should be the Democratic nominee?
As an urban mayor serving a diverse community, the racial divide lives within me. I'm not saying that I became mayor and racism or crime or poverty ended on my watch. But in our city, we have come together repeatedly to tackle challenges like the fact that far too many people were not getting the help they needed in their housing, and so we directed it to a historically underinvested African-American neighborhood. Right now, in the wake of a police-involved shooting, our community is moving from hurting to healing by making sure that the community can participate in things like revising the use of force policy and making sure there are community voices on the Board of Safety that handles police matters. I've proposed a Douglas plan to tackle this issue nationally because mayors have hit the limits of what you can do unless there is national action. Systemic racism has touched every part of American life, from housing to health to home ownership. If you walk into an emergency room and you are black, your reports of pain will be taken less seriously. If you apply for a job and you are black, you are less likely to be called just because of the name on the resume. It's why I've proposed that we do everything from investing in historically redlined neighborhoods to build black wealth in home ownership.
Thank you, Mayor.
To supporting entrepreneurship for black
Thank you
Americans.
very much. Senator Klobuchar.
That was a perfect answer. He not only answered it, he answered it in the way that it was framed, and he assumed from the beginning that Don Lemon knew about the struggles that he had in his community, and he tackled them head on. We're about to see something else entirely. So in the bad, we have Warren at 17 minutes during the second debate, but we're going to look at Bernie Sanders at 4 minutes in, or actually 2.5 minutes during the first debate. Basically, because usually he's refreshingly direct in his answers, this is an unusual turn of events. He answered it eventually, but it took a little prying.
Americans would be, quote, delighted to pay more taxes for things like that. My question to you is, will taxes go up for the middle class in a Sanders administration? And if so, how do you sell that to voters?
Well, you're quite right. We have a new vision for America. And at a time when we have 3 people in this country owning more wealth than the bottom half of America, while 500,000 people are sleeping out on the streets today, we think it is time for change, real change. And by that I mean that health care, in my view, is a human right. And we have got to pass a Medicare for all single-payer system. Under that system, by the way, vast majority of the people in this country will be paying significantly less for health care than they are right now. I believe that education is the future for this country. And that is why I believe that we must make public colleges and universities tuition-free and eliminate student debt. And we do that by placing a tax on Wall Street. Every proposal that I have brought forth is fully paid for.
Senator Sanders, I'll give you 10 seconds just to answer the very direct question. Will you raise taxes for the middle class in a Sanders administration?
People who have health care under Medicare for all will have no premiums, No deductibles, no co-payments, no out-of-pocket expenses. Yes, they will pay more in taxes, but less in health care for what they get.
Thank you, Senator.
I don't think I need to explain to you why that is a problematic answer. Just because it took him so long to arrive at the answer, which should have come first. Now we get to the ugly. Beto during the first debate at 7:03. Biden during the first debate at 4:50. But we're going to look at Tulsi Gabbard at around 12 minutes during the first debate. She was asked about her stance regarding equal pay. This is her answer.
Your thoughts on equal pay?
Well, first of all, let's recognize the situation we're in, that the American people deserve a president who will put your interests ahead of the rich and powerful. That's not what we have right now. I enlisted in the Army National Guard after the al-Qaeda terror attacks on 9/11, so I could go after those who had attacked us on that day. I still serve as a major, served over 16 years, deployed twice to the Middle East, and in Congress serve on the Foreign Affairs and Armed Services Committees for over 6 years. I know the importance of our national security, as well as the terribly high cost of war. And for too long, our leaders have failed us, taking us from one regime change war to the next, leading us into a new Cold War and arms race, costing us trillions of our hard-earned taxpayer dollars and countless lives. This insanity must end. As president, I will take your hard-earned taxpayer dollars and instead invest those dollars into serving your needs. Things like health care, a green economy, good-paying jobs, protecting our environment, and so much more.
Wow. I've listened to that like 5 times now, and I haven't heard a single word regarding equal pay in that answer at all. Not even, she doesn't even allude to it. It's actually a horrible answer, and she did herself no favors with that. It is really good that she was able to turn it around during the second debate, because if she had performed like she did during the first debate, she would definitely be out. Anyway, let's go into the third area. And this third area is listen for what isn't said, either by your interlocutor or your opponent. It's related to number 1, but it's much more important. What I mean by that is that it's far too easy to get caught up in the argument you're currently engaged in and fail to notice a bigger opportunity. Or a keener debater might hear something not brought up by an opponent, whether by design or ignorance, which would seriously damage that opponent or that opponent's argument. For example, when Warren called out Delaney during the CNN debate for being a right-wing stooge at around the 60-minute mark, she did it by listening to Delaney and correctly summarizing his last statement, as well as putting it in the least charitable reading possible. This is by far the skill most difficult to master. It takes a thorough knowledge of the topic being debated, as well as the skill of knowing the best time to employ it. One of the reasons for the lack of skill in this regard is the rarity of such opportunities. Most of the time, the moment has passed before you even realize that it existed. There are ways to steer the debate in that direction, varying from the skillful to the obvious, but that is a much more difficult skill than even knowing when to attack. Anyway, we're going to look at the good. We could talk about the aforementioned Warren clip, but we're going to look at Cory Booker's answer during the second debate at around the 45-minute mark.
Senator Booker, you have a plan that would, quote, virtually eliminate immigration detention. Does that mean that the roughly 55,000 migrants currently in detention would be released into the United States?
Absolutely. First of all, I just want to say, again, tonight, we are playing into Republican hands who have a very different view, and they're trying to divide us against each other. I'm listening to the language of my colleagues. No, Mr. Vice President, we are not going to just let people cross the border. An unlawful crossing is an unlawful crossing if you do it in the civil courts or if you do it through the criminal courts. But the criminal courts is what is giving Donald Trump the ability to truly violate the human rights of people coming to our country who no one surrenders their human rights. And so doing it through the civil courts means that you won't need these awful detention facilities that I have been to, seeing children sleeping on pavement, people being put in cages, nursing mothers, small children. This is not necessary. We have seen, using the civil system, piloted programs that have 100% compliance with the civil courts, where people are evaluated. If they have no justifiable reason to be here, they are returned. If they are like the people I met in Juarez who were survivors of sexual assault, who we wouldn't even let come and present for asylum. We are butchering our values and making ourselves
Senator Booker,
less
thank
safe.
you very much.
That was a really powerful answer, but he did it first by pointing out the right-wing nature of the way that his opponents were talking and the way that they weren't talking about it, which is the way that he and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and the like wanted to talk about it, because they know the inherent worth of an immigrant. And he did it in such a way that he could then go on to talk about his experiences in Juarez and what that experience meant to him. Anyway, we're going to go to the bad. Biden did especially bad at 4:43 during the first debate, but we're going to look at Beto's answer during the second debate at 64-24.
Congressman O'Rourke, please respond. I think a big part of leadership and showing our commitment to the American people is delivering on our commitments. As a member of Congress, when I learned that the El Paso VA had the worst wait times for mental health care in the country, meaning that care delayed functionally became care denied and was related to the suicide epidemic, we made it our priority and we turned around the VA in El Paso. We took that lesson nationally, and I worked with Republican and Democratic colleagues to expand mental health care to veterans, and we got it signed into law by the one person with whom I agree on almost nothing, Donald Trump, to show that at the end of the day, we will put the American people first, before party, before any other concern.
Like I said, or actually I don't think I've said this, but let me just go ahead and say that whenever when I categorize something in the bad category, I'm not saying that it was bad. There are only three possibilities. And basically, if you weren't good, and to be good, that means you had to nail it, then you were bad. While this isn't an especially bad answer, there are a bunch of things that weren't said during Amy Klobuchar's answer, which is the answer preceding it, to which he could have added a whole bunch to what wasn't said. But he decided to go his own way, and it just wasn't that effective. But for the ugly portion of this, we can look at Delaney at 24 minutes during the first minute, but we're going to go back a little bit to 63:50 during the second debate and listen to her answer and how absolutely horrible it is.
I want to bring in Senator Klobuchar. At the beginning of the night, you said you're going to hear a lot of promises on the stage. And previously you have said, when asked about your primary opponents, quote, a lot of people are making promises and I'm not going to make promises just to get elected. Who on this stage is making promises just to get elected?
Everyone wants to get elected, but my point is this. I think when we have a guy in the White House that has now told over 10,000 lies, that we better be very straightforward with the American people. And no, do I think that we are going to end up voting for a plan that kicks half of America off of their current insurance in 4 years? No, I don't think we're going to do that. I think there is a better way to get what we all want to see, which is lower costs for health care. Do I think that we're going to vote to give free college to the wealthiest kids? No, I don't think we're going to do that. So that's what I'm talking about. But what I don't like about this argument right now, what I don't like about it at all, is that we are more worried about winning an argument than winning an election. And I think how we win an election is to bring everyone with us. And yes, I am one in a state every single time statewide. I have won those congressional districts that Donald Trump won by over 20 points. He just targeted Minnesota last week. And I've done it by getting out there and talking to people, by knowing rural issues and farm issues, and bringing metro people with me in the state that had the highest voter turnout in the country.
I want to bring in Congressman O'Rourke. Congressman O'Rourke, please respond.
Oh, my Lord. Okay, so even though Amy Klobuchar is going to go on to the third debate, I really don't see her hope of continuing her candidacy all the way to the first primary. I think that she has already lost a lot of steam, and she's probably going to lose a lot more. This was a horrible answer, not the least of which because it wasn't an answer to the question that was asked, but I didn't talk about it then. But I am going to talk about it now because she tried to make a statement about the way that she thought the debate would go, and she tried to make a statement about how we should all just get along, etc. She left a lot out there that wasn't said that a competent debater could have picked up on and picked her apart for. Just because they didn't doesn't make it a good answer. Not only that, but the things that she did choose to focus on that hadn't been asked by the question were extraneous and not very helpful. For instance, we don't really care about how many times you've won state elections. This is about how you can improve the lives of all Americans. Plain and simple. Anyway, I don't know who's going to win, and this wasn't meant to demonstrate that. However, after going through that list, you now have a much clearer idea of what I'm looking for in a candidate. I'm looking for a candidate who, like Andrew said, is the exact opposite of Donald Trump, but not in superficial ways. Rather, I want them to be intellectual, down to earth, able to listen to others, and able to take constructive criticism well. Anyway, that's my 2 cents worth. If you'd be interested in seeing more of my content and to always be notified of anything new I put out, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. If you like this video, please hit like. If not, you know what to do, and tell me about it below. If you'd like to help me continue improving my channel, please consider visiting my Patreon page and becoming a patron for as little as $1 monthly, or to my PayPal account for a one-time donation. You can find me on Twitter or Facebook under the name PanicClown. As usual, my Discord and Instagram pages are up, but still underutilized, and I'll catch you on the flip side.